This meeting is being recorded.
It's always a pleasure to talk to Fiona Cochrane, a filmmaker whose films I very much admire. And Fiona has a new film playing at this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, a film called Patou-In Black and White. And as always, it's a pleasure to talk to Fiona Cochrane. Fiona, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Peter. Lovely to be here.
It's such an interesting story about Pat Powell. What a interesting background he has. How did you get to know him?
Well, via a previous film that I made. So I think a couple of years ago, we were talking around this time when my Strange Tenants Scarred for Life documentary was screening at Melbourne Documentary Film Festival.
Yes.
And in that, I interviewed Pat for that film. To be the authentic Jamaican who was talking about Scar, etc. And he was great, and we got on quite well. And after that, when he saw the film, he then asked me if I wanted to make a film about him. And I didn't know a lot about Pat at the time, I have to say, because he'd been largely a Sydney sort of person. I'd seen him in Scar Vendors. I knew a few of his things and the Melbourne Scar Orchestra, but I didn't really know much about him. But we decided to just proceed and see how we went. So it's a low budget documentary, and we've put it together over a couple of years with lockdowns disturbing a lot of the interviewing, so we've had to wait for a while to get things done. But what became evident in interviewing him was not so much that he'd done lots of big, huge things. He's done certainly a lot of music as a wonderful singer who plays with lots of different bands. But what really came across was the family sort of setting, this family situation, all of those things. And once I interviewed his children, then all of that stuff to do with identity came up, because he's had 4 children who've all got different mothers, white mothers of different nationalities, and they all identify quite differently. Well, the 4th is still young, so wasn't interviewed, but the 3 that we did interview all have quite different ideas about identity and how they fit in with that. So that became very interesting. And the whole thing about Pat in being a father and actually deciding not to follow his musical career, in fact, to stay in Australia, even after his relationships had broken up, because he wanted to be around for, initially his son, and later his other children.
That is such an interesting story, and it's really well developed in this film. It's did Pat give you any ideas about whether he wanted you to pull back on some of the interviews or on some of the discussions with his children, because it's such a fascinating story?
No, he didn't. He didn't. He was fantastic. He didn't know what I was going to do with it, and he just said, here's all my friends and family, interview them and do what you like, which was fantastic. And I felt very privileged to be given that sort of opportunity with it too. So we tried to be careful and not, be fair to everybody in what has in his family at different times been quite difficult situations. And so we were wanting to be, really as reasonable as we could in all of that. But no, he didn't. And I did at the end, when we screened it, he was coming to Melbourne. I didn't bring him for it, but he was coming down. I said, I need you to sit down and look through this and tell me if this is okay. Are you happy? Do we need to take anything out for any of your various relationships and things? And he went, no. That's the way it is, and I'm happy for you to do it. So he was incredibly open with it.
That is terrific, because as I said, it's such an interesting story, and his musical background is so interesting, as you said, with the Scar documentary a few years ago, and the other music he's been involved with. He is such a good singer, and that comes across in the film.
Yeah, no, he's got a fantastic voice, and he sings just such a range of songs. He's just, a fabulous singer who really hasn't got the sort of accolades that are probably due to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in fashioning the documentary, Fiona, I noticed you used archival footage, you used photos, you used animation, etc. That all of that must have been very carefully planned in the way that you wanted to film his story.
Look, not nearly as much as I would have liked to, really. We had a shortage of stuff, as is often the case. This happened with the Strange Tenants as well, but because most of these people were at their peak back in the 70s, when in fact there was very little footage, particularly if you were a low budget musician at that time. Nobody was doing anything much, taking many photos, doing any music clips, nothing much. So in fact we had to sort of piece together as best we could. I kept harassing him month after month. Have you got some photo? Have you got some more photo? Have you got anything? Oh, can you? So it took a lot of scouting around to find what we could with it. So it was a little bit light on. There's a very little bit of animation in it, but not very much at all. But we tried to just get what we could with it. But yes, it was difficult trying to find all the supporting material.
Well, you did a good job in putting together what you were able to find and so on. I find his story so interesting that he was born in England, and then is really he sees himself as a Jamaican, and there are some hints of racism that come across in his story. I found all of that quite interesting.
Well, I think there's a lot more than hints of racism. There's, it was very racist in Britain when he grew up, and he left Britain as a result of that, and doesn't identify with Britain at all as a result of that, even though his family, most of his birth family, his sisters and his mum, still live in Bristol in the UK. But yeah, he doesn't, feel identity with Britain, and that's one of the things that we discuss with the identity issues, not just his children's, but his own, that he feels very much Jamaican, even though he's not actually spent a lot of time in Jamaica in his life.
Again, so interesting, his background and his experiences, and he talks about singing in other countries, I think in Germany, etc. It's again, he as you have already mentioned, he could have had such a major career, but he has made other decisions. Yes.
So I think that, having children and being emotionally committed to his children, and not having a fabulous, as we sort of point out in the film, he has a very strong relationship with his mother and his sisters, but his father was a bit of a useless father. So he wanted to be different to his father and had quite a strong commitment to be the father of his children.
Again, so interesting. So I'm glad you mentioned that he was happy to see the final cut of the film, and I think it tells his story so well.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't ruffle anybody else's feathers in the family, so to speak, or upset anybody. Look, we have tried to tell all what we needed to tell, but without sort of whitewashing anything, but to at the same time, not upset anybody if we can.
Sure, but it's as you say, it's about identity, about family, about how people develop and for various reasons. So I think it has a lot to say about that.
Yep.
So
about how people deal with racism, because Pat's very accepting and has worked out ways to deal with racism in his life, whereas his daughter, for example, is still struggling with that. And
which again was so interesting. Pat has a real sense of humor about him. He deals with things in a very pleasant, hopeful sort of way, which I found so interesting based on the experiences he's had.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he's a very happy, smiley, congenial fellow who, will talk to anybody and you know, that's really been his best part in presenting to the world, because people do like him and engage with him and get past the racism.
Right. What's he doing now?
Look, he's still doing the same as he's been doing for a long time. He's still in, I mean, this wasn't filmed that long ago, so he's still in, you know, 15 bands doing a variety of different things. Obviously, some of them may have collapsed with COVID, but most of them are sort of picking up. He was down in Melbourne last week playing with the Scar Vendors. And yeah, so, and he's still continuing to work all the time up in Sydney in a variety of different bands.
Okay, very good. I don't suppose you had much financial support or production behind you, because it's always difficult to get support to make documentaries like this.
Look, it is, and particularly one-offs with people that aren't particularly well known. So no, we didn't. I have to say I didn't actually even attempt to. I have a sort of small crew that I work with and work part-time in another job to help support myself make films, and so we just made it really. Yeah, so it is a low-budget job.
Well done, because you've made so many films. It's incredible, your filmography and the diverse range of topics that you deal with. Thank
you. Quite a lot of music ones. So music is certainly one of the things I enjoy making films about. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. So in fashioning this, it's a 54-minute feature documentary. I can imagine that there were still some issues related to editing. So deciding what to leave in and leave out, and that must have been part of your process.
That is always the case. It's always the hardest bit, is cutting everything out, but that's the nature of it. So yeah, we had to just decide what we wanted to follow. I mean, I was, once we started the interviews and I started talking to people, and I really didn't know. I had no idea. I had no script initially going into it. But once we started the interviews, it was pretty clear to me that this was going to be about family. This was going to be about all of those. So then we could, you know, we knew where we were going then with a lot of the interviews. And we came back and did some more interviewing with Pat at the end to sort of clarify some of those areas that had come up with all the other interviews. So I think, yeah, I mean, in film, you either make a 50-minute or you make a feature. So if you know, we could have easily been around the 60, 70-minute, but then it's a very difficult documentary to place at other places. So you just have to cut back to the sort of lengths that are acceptable in the industry.
Yep. No, I absolutely understand. So apart from screening at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in July, how else will the film be rolled out?
I can't exactly tell you. We've just been so busy trying to get it done. It's still just getting finished, graded and outputted at the moment. So this is the first festival it's screening at. And then we'll see. So I'll start entering it in other festivals and things and sending it off to other places after this. Yeah,
excellent.
So can't tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand. You're still in that process. So are you also, Fiona, I assume you are, working on another film at the moment?
I'm working on 3 or 4 at different stages.
Okay. Are they all music-based, or what are they about?
No, one's music-based. So because we did do most of the filming for Pat, even though we're only just finishing it now, we did do the bulk of the interviewing, in fact, before COVID. So last year, in between COVID years, we filmed the Conway Brothers. So you may remember Captain Matchbox Whoopee Band, etc., and the 1970s music scene. So we're now just moving on to editing that one, which will be a feature documentary about the Mick and Jim Conway, who were in the Captain Matchbox, and then each went their own way in different bands, you know, a number of different bands. And I'm also producing for the person for Mark Street, who's the cinematographer on a lot of my stuff now. He shot the second half of Pat, of Patou, and he certainly shot the Conway brothers documentary, and he is directing a documentary on Indigenous artists that I'm producing. So that's visual artists who have, in fact, interestingly, and nothing to do with Patou, it was all quite separate, but which is all about mixed identity and Indigenous artists too. So it's artists who have sort of cross identities and how that affects them in their work and their identity. And I'm also doing a series on photographers.
You are always busy. That's fantastic. You're involved in so many projects. I'm really pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
Well done.
So hopefully you'll get some next year at the Melbourne Doco Film Festival. But for this one, Patou.
Okay. New film each year. That's wonderful. I think the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival appreciates it. So well done on that. Fiona, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been speaking to Fiona Cochrane, the director of Patou-In Black and White, screening as part of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Fiona, thanks so much for talking with me.
Pleasure. Thank you for asking me too. Thanks.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.